Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video I want to talk about the shift and the change in the champions that we are getting released. And before somebody is already heading to the comments section accusing me of quote unquote being negative, this is not meant to be a negative video at all. This is meant to be more of an inquiry video about what are your thoughts, because there definitely has been a shift. I do have some concerns. I do have some positives of it, because I do think something like that had to happen as well. And inevitably, that also, I believe, has been the impact of Battlegrounds. And what we're going to be talking specifically is the abundance of defenders being released, because whether we like it or not, whether you have noticed or not, we are getting a lot more defensive champions added to Marvel Concept champions, where they are either dual purpose or kind of like more strictly defensive based. And for the first time in this game's history, they are very, very valuable. They are very desirable, and people do want to acquire them. And that is largely thanks to Battlegrounds. If previously a champion like Korg was only, cared for in regards of Alliance War, and it was effectively like some unlucky soul had to rank up a champion for defense, then now Battlegrounds has completely shifted the idea of champion value, and good defensive abilities are super important, because Battlegrounds, again, whether you like to admit it or not, are currently the most competitive and dominant game mode, which kind of dictates the metas and what champions do and do not have value, as evident, for instance, with the slide down of APOC and a handful of other champions, because they just do not perform well in that game mode, and therefore significantly less people rank that champion and care for it. And on the contrary, champions like Korg and Domino and a bunch of others have seen their value rise drastically. And for a while, I kind of thought we had hit a decently good balance since the release of Battlegrounds, and in the first half of this year, with the release of champions like Absorbing Man, with the release of a handful of others from the previous years, like Atuma, for instance, and Hulkling being dual purpose, Rintra, and that seemed relatively mild. However, Kabam has definitely amped up the defensive power released in the contest, without a doubt. And if you take a look at the last several months only, we need to see that Bullseye is a roadblock skill defender that is very hard to deal with. Now, granted, he's the newest and freshest addition, and obviously, as the time goes by, we're going to find more counters. We're going to get better to dealing with him, kind of like we are getting better to dealing with, let's say, Kindred or Photon, and so on and so forth. But if we just take a look at last, 4 or 5 months, then we have the release of Bullseye, Onslaught, Shield, which is also a defensive nightmare, to be honest. Then we have Maestro, Photon, right? Werewolf by Night, kind of, but he's primarily being used defensively now, and Kindred. So there is definitely 100% concentrated effort in releasing these absolute nightmare defenders that, will completely wreck you unless you get a good matchup effectively against them. And that is kind of my personal biggest pet peeve, because these champions are, extremely powerful on defense, and it's not from the point of view that I'm tired of getting wrecked by these defenders, for instance. It's more so from the point of view that they are making these games more, specifically Battlegrounds, more RNG specific. Because these champions, with their kits being released, with their specials practically undexable, and you having to have like a very specific set of qualities in a champion in order to be able to deal with Onslaught, for instance. Because if you use a metal champion, you're just not ever gonna get rid of those neuroshocks, and you're gonna be taking more damage there. And Bullseye, again, dealing with that away is just going to be stalling you forever. Similarly with Maestro, unless you have Stagger or some very specific champion like Kate, you're just gonna time out. And that is making the game kind of more RNG reliant. And that is my personal biggest concern. Not that, we're going to carry on getting wrecked by these specific defenders that are being released. Because as I said, the more time goes by, the better we are at fighting these champions. And then over the time, only the best of the best defenders kind of, withstand the test of time. Like Sasquatch, because he's so chunky. Like Korg, because he's just finicky, AI can screw you, and there's still plenty of going on in the fight. And, those are old champions and examples of champions that are doing very, very well currently as defenders that have withstood the test of time. but they're still relatively open in terms of which champions you can use to at least try and get them down. And that option is kind of getting eliminated with champions like, Photon, with champions like Onslaught, with champions like Bullseye, and which effectively means you either get a fairly suitable or very suitable counter, or you're kind of done. Now, on the other hand, we are all subjected to the same thing, and that does allow for a greater expression of skill. Ideally, I would like to say that, but I can't with the specific nature of these defenders. Obviously, still, ultimately, if both players get equally bad matchups, then, the higher skilled player will still win. But more and more, I think we can notice where, Battlegrounds fights are more and more draft dependent, not necessarily whether you play well or not. I myself have won a ton of fights that I had absolutely no business winning, just because, you get opponent in a very, very rough spot, taking on, I don't know, something like Werewolf by Night or an Onslaught or FAM, for instance. That said, all of that put aside, one thing that I'm worried about, and that is genuinely making me enjoy the game less at this point a bit, and I don't know whether that's true for everybody, it just feels like the game is getting somewhat too complex to navigate unless you're dedicating exorbitant amounts of time to it, in terms of, learning these intricate special attack dexes of each individual champion, learning these special ability quirks that these champions have. And then on top of it all, now obviously, like in Battlegrounds, we have the attacker tactics, and we have, more and more intricate defensive tactics. It just seems like the game is starting to increase in complexity to an almost unmanageable degree. And large part of that is the fact that champions right now, have absolute Bibles for abilities, and there's like, this champion works for that champion unless there is, this, and that, and that, and that, and that node, and it is just getting quite a lot to manage. Like, even for me, and I play this game, quite actively and daily. And that has been a concern for me for quite a while, but I think it's just going further and further. And I want to emphasize the fact that we don't need champions that have like a Bible in their abilities, as evident by plenty of champions that are old but still manage and do very well, or older champion reworks that typically are more conservative. Like, we have champions like, I don't know, Kingpin and Juggernaut and Massacre, and, obviously Archangel and Torch, and plenty of these older champions, Hyperion, that do well and are actively, interesting and fun and exciting in the game. And they achieve that without having this insanely long ability text. And that is, the final thing that I definitely wish Kabam kind of restricted themselves way more, because they can't seem to help themselves when it comes to it recently. And every new champion has like abilities on top of abilities and on top of abilities on top of abilities, many of whom are like legitimately irrelevant. And, that is true, and you know it. We can take a look at some of the, more recent examples as well. You could definitely make these kits significantly simpler, and we do have champions that do not use, a portion of their abilities for sure. What would be the best example here? Captain America Sam Wilson, for example, a champion from the last year. Again, he has tons and tons of abilities, as we can see here. But, most of whom are kind of usable, but every special attack having additional abilities if you're locked on or not locked on. And, level 3 being in the Bible in itself, which is a special attack that I think should be simplified in general and made less prevalent in the game. And, for instance, he's 25. He has some resistance to bleed and poison based on his armor ups. they could just give him flat out resistance or an immunity and make it, significantly shorter. Remember, it's hard to get in the details, but for sure, plenty of these champions don't, need all of these abilities. The champion that I typically go to reference in regards of that is actually a slightly older one, but it still presents the point extremely well, which is Black Widow Deadly Origins, where we don't really use or care for most of her abilities, other than the shock and the shock damage and, maybe the defensive ability accuracy reduction on the base hits once you do intercept, once you get Widow's Insight. But the whole sabotage business, basically nobody ever uses for anything, and I don't think it just had to be there. And we had plenty of things like that with newer champions as well, for sure. I think Absorbing Man definitely could cut out a few lines of his kit, It seems that every new champion also is working with some form of individual currency, like Absorbing Man has his morph charges, then, even Adam Warlock has his hit counter and sovereign buffs and whatnot happening there. Then we have, Cassie Lang with Pin Particles, Shield with Cleanse charges and her ramp-up charges from, the Brother Bear or Sister Eagle. It's virtually, Gladiator has his, Courage now, I believe, or Confidence buffs that is also, his own specific currency, and so does Kindred with his Atrophy or whatever they call their charges. It seems that every champion is just trying to be, this whole brand new, different thing, when I genuinely don't think that's, needed as much. I think it is kind of, stretching out the champion's kit for the sake of having it stretched out. And the best examples here forever will be, the more successful champion buffs. Those champions often do not have a ton of abilities, but they still perform great. So, I don't know. There definitely, again, has been a shift in champion abilities, specifically geared on defense, with a continued shift in expanding champion abilities into a Bible, which I don't necessarily think is, increasing the enjoyment of this game. Because ultimately that is the goal, for these champions to feel enjoyable and be useful, right? And just because champions have, 5,000 words in their ability kit does not mean that, they will bring meaningful things to the game and that there was any point in it. And I kind of feel like with some of the champions, we're losing the goal of what this game is supposed to be. For sure. Anyways, let me know what you guys think about the change in the champion design and the increase in the defenders and the role of Battlegrounds have played in what we value in champions. And I'm going to catch you guys soon. Bye-bye. Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information